My name is Denise Beck. I'm Executive Director of Velvet Ashes. I'm here in the Midwest where it is the surface of the sun hot. And I did get a full night's sleep last night. Sarah Hilkeman, our program director, is joining us from a little bit north in Nebraska, and she got to do something fun last night. Sarah, what did you get to do?
Yes, I got to see the author and podcaster Amy F. Downs. She's doing a live podcast tour kind of around the US. So my sister and I drove down to Kansas City and got to see her. It was fantastic.
I love that. And she loves you guys enough that she drove back in the middle of the night just so that she could be a part of this live today. So sleep deprived Sarah up
Yes,
there.
with my coffee.
That's right. Cheers, ladies. And then Caitlin is joining us from Tokyo, and she is staying up past my bedtime to chat with us today, looking so lovely. Caitlin, how are you?
I'm great. I'm really excited. And yeah, this is well worth staying up late. But if I say something really weird, it's because I'm normally not talking anything, coherent. See, this is already starting really great.
We shouldn't have to be making our brain function this way after 10 p.m. at night. What time is it for you?
It's 10 at night.
10. Yeah, I'm way in my jammies by that point. So we'll get back to a little bit about that. And then Andrea is an old friend of mine. We actually served together in Uganda for a time. And Andrea, tell us a little bit about where you're coming to us from. And did you get a full night's sleep last night?
I am very well rested, yes. And it's the perfect time of day. It's just, it's 9 o'clock for me. So I'm in northern New Jersey.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I want to get a little bit more into your introductions in just a minute. But Sarah, would you just explain for people that might be hopping on what the process is? Because we do want to interact if they have any questions about this topic today.
Yes, absolutely. This is a conversation between the people you see on the screen, but also with you if you are watching. And so if you are on Zoom with us, you will see the chat box. And that is where you can add your comments, your reactions, your thoughts, your questions. As you have a question, you don't have to wait until the end. Go ahead and just put that in the chat box. I will be watching that. Denise will be watching that. And we'll just make sure that we get to those questions that you have, even if it's just clarifying something. The setting for the chat is that it's sent to the panelists, so we will see it. If that's what you want, that's great. If you want to add a comment or a question for everyone to see, just make sure you set it to all panelists and attendees. Also, if you are watching live on Facebook, you can add a question there too, and we will watch for those and get those added. So please do that. We want to hear from you and interact with you.
Fantastic. All right, ladies. The reason that we're here today is to talk about short-term trips. You love them, you hate them. Your team may have divided thoughts about whether they're a great idea. You personally yourself may have experienced going and receiving. And so we just kind of want to talk a little bit into that. So Caitlin, would you just kind of introduce a little bit about how long you've been where you are and maybe your interaction with short-term teams and that whole process?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start before I got to where I am now. I went on a trip for like 2 months to Tibet when I was in college. And after that, I was like, I'm going to be a sender. So it's funny, like it doesn't always, if you go on one of these trips, it doesn't always mean it's like the gateway to long-term anything. But anyway, I'm here in Tokyo, and it's been a blessing and, of course, full of joy and hardship. We've been here as a family for 13 years. All my kids were born here. I have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old, 3 boys and 1 girl. And so we do church plant. Yeah, is that okay? I am not sure. I have to be thinking about what's good to say and not. Yes, but my husband is pastor, and we do church planting here in Tokyo. And so yes, we've had some great teams, and we have a different context, I think, because we live in the largest city in the world. It's a place that it's hard for me to even find a table for my family of 6 to sit at a restaurant. I mean, we're sometimes just an absolute freak show, just the 6 of us walking down the sidewalk. And so, there have been times where someone contacted us and said, can we bring 50 people? And it just logistically,
That's
that's,
overwhelming.
yeah. So, some contexts would look very different than ours. So I'm interested to hear like you guys' experience. But I hope that we've learned things along the way that can be applicable in any context to like how to have a really good trip, because it can be such a huge blessing. So anyway,
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
excited to talk about this.
When I asked you both, I didn't think about the conflicting, in a good way, dynamic of huge city, village in Africa and receiving teams. But man, that's going to be an interesting thing to even talk about, just because it is such a different dynamic in how you host when
Mhm.
you have such different types of areas. So, Andrea, tell us a little bit about your experience on the field with that as well, but also what you're doing now, and that kind of bookend to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Denise. Well, for myself, I would say I was kind of like, I grew up in the early 90s and I was a product of the STM boom. That was my life. And so I was
STM, tell everybody what you mean by that.
So STM is a short-term mission or a short-term team, which is, the conversation today. And I went on my first trip when I was 11 years old, and it became like just a yearly thing. It was just part of my, service each year. And I loved it. I loved the people I met. I loved all the places that I got to go and experience. Eventually 2006, my husband and I got married, and we ended up moving to Uganda in 2008. We were there serving for 5 years, and we were both involved in these short-term trips as high school students, as college students. And once we got married, we really felt this desire to experience something a little bit longer and to see what it was really like to be immersed in a culture. And so God led us to Uganda, and that's where we served for a number of years. And I got to meet Denise there, and we were kind of in the same circle of people there. And going to Uganda, now I was on a completely different side of these short-term trips, where now we became the hosts, and it just blew my mind of what I experienced as a young person going on trips, being the one going, and the difference of being the receiver and being the host for them. And so it really revolutionized my perspective on short-term missions and has informed where we are today. So today we serve in New Jersey with a ministry called Touch the World. Really, our focus as Touch the World is to be a resource and an equipping agency for churches and groups and individuals to equip them to properly go out and serve in short-term trips. And really, we draw upon our experience of being that host and the one who is receiving teams for so long, and the things that we felt the short-term teams that came to visit us were really lacking and that are essential for them to know before they go.
Absolutely. And actually, it's just bringing back so many memories of the feeling of preparing to receive a team and all of that work that goes into it. I served in Uganda and South Sudan, and so my context is more village, rural, and some of those aspects, are even tiers of people that are ready, because that is a really hard trip for some people who are used to air conditioning, who are used to a certain diet or allergies that they may have. I remember even conversations about, are we a tier 2 place where you have to have had cross-cultural travel before you come to us? Don't come to us as your very first experience traveling cross-culturally. So those are just types of conversations, that teams have when they're thinking about that. Sarah served in Cambodia. Sarah, I imagine your context is a little more similar to ours, but what was yours like there?
Yeah, so my teammate and I did host a couple of short-term teams that came, and we were in the city to start and then went to kind of a more rural area. They were unique in that they were really small teams, and my brother was on both of those. So
Family short-term team.
yes, yeah. Which was really fun because I got to serve alongside of him in those instances. But yeah, they weren't big teams. There was a lot of logistics and there was a lot of travel. It was about 7 hours from the city to where we went. But yeah, kind of both the city and rural area.
So if we're going to just talk about this, I think we need to just lay the foundation of what is a short-term team when we're talking about it, because we do have the family visit, which I would say is not a short-term team. If your family's coming and you're going to vacation and that's a difference. But then you also may have the group that's coming and they're going to be there a year. I don't consider that a short-term team either. So as you guys speak into your experience, what would you consider a short-term team, a trip, and the different types of trips that maybe we would be looking to receive? What are we going to talk about today, basically?
I would say for my experience, most of the short-term trips that I've been involved in or today or even part of sending or equipping for are 7 to 14 days. That's just been my experience, the 1 to 2 week. And I think when we're talking about short-term missions, it's the perspective of I'm going for a short time. The person who's going is keeping in their mind, this is just a 1 week, a 2 week. They're not looking at it as a long-term event. They're kind of looking at it as a singular experience.
And not to be confused with the fact that God doesn't use that to then get them back somewhere serving long-term, which is, I think, one of the things to keep in mind is that these teams aren't just for our benefit, but it's actually shaping and letting the Lord use this to continue the next generation of those who would serve. Caitlin, what types of trips, so you get maybe the 7 to 14 day type of trip. What types of asks might you have or be receiving during that time frame?
Do you mean like from the actual people, what we would want their trip to look like?
Yeah, there's different reasons a team might come over. Is it project based? Is it to fill a need? Is it a survey to just show what we're doing so they can go back and be ambassadors for the work? What types of reasons might you accept a short-term trip?
Well, I can speak to like the things that we look for our specific context, which is super urban Japan. People can come for 3 months on a tourist visa. That would be like the cap of what somebody could actually legally be here. If they're going to go through the hassle of taking a ship to Korea and try to re-enter, then maybe we could consider them something besides like a short term. But so for these 2 week, let's say, trips, we have, I actually wrote down 4 kind of categories of what makes a good trip. And these are things that we would look for and that we would probably talk with the groups. We would ask them like, what category would you fit into? What do you kind of expect to be able to do during your time? And then if it doesn't fit into these categories, then like what else are you thinking? Because these are kind of what we're looking for. So the first one would be accountability and oversight. And in our context, these are all smaller groups because we, like I said earlier, we just can't logistically handle a huge group. So these are like real leaders that bring real accountability to our team. And they hold us to real standards. So that's like us kind of being like, we're ready to have you see everything and we're ready to hear the good or the bad. If it goes poorly, then we need to like figure out, what we should be changing. We understand not everybody understands exactly Japanese context or whatever, but these would be people that could actually speak into what we're doing. If it goes well, then it would kind of end up becoming the second category. It would be more of a vision trip. And that's where, they're like encouraged, they see what we're doing. And then it's kind of on us then to give them a vision of the ministry and the need in our context. And so this would be, key leaders of churches or members of supporting churches, and they just get a vision for what we're doing. They understand the context better.
So that first group, though, that wouldn't be some random person you don't know that's emailing you and they say, we want to come and speak into your team. That would be someone you have a relationship with that has walked with you
Yeah.
for a while, type of thing.
Yes, it would be like someone in leadership that we would actually want to be part of our accountability team. And the way our church planting network functions is there's less than 1% Christian, so we're often the very first Christian a person meets here. So when you think about long-term like church leadership, we're like sharing the gospel first. So it's a long process of training up people, evangelizing people, and then like we would have eldership, local church leadership way down the line. And so we get people from the states that kind of serve as our accountability or leadership. So it'd be people like that.
Yeah.
So another example. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Another example of like a category for what would be helpful is people that would be able to provide encouragement and care for us or for people like Christians that we're working with. So these would be people that preferably have had some experience living overseas, that they maybe have counseling background or can just be actually provide care and help. Like an example of this is our friends Chris and Carol, who have come here so many times. I know that Denise, at least you know them. Yeah. They have walked with us through some of the darkest valleys, and they always bring us delicious Seas chocolate from the airport on their way over here. And like they've not only blessed our family, but our whole network and people that speak English that go to our churches. So they can really truly encourage people. So this is like small, specific things. The fourth one would be some kind of ministry service for a specific need we have. And this would have to like work on the right timeline. We've had bigger groups come to help our church in Kobe. They've done amazing, like huge renovation projects. Basically, people from America have like made this church building possible for the church there 2 times. So, but out of the 5 years of that church being in existence, that's like a total of 4 weeks of people coming over and working hard and making that happen. But it's a specific need that they can do. This would also be, we bring people over to teach seminars. We can get a translator for them. That gives us a break. It like allows us to rest and be nourished in the word. I just sit there and like, weep because they brought somebody to watch my kids and I can just listen to somebody teaching and it's not us running everything. That's so helpful. We also have people come do childcare for like retreats and things like that. That's all super helpful. So it's not just like random. I've always loved Japan and how do I get over there? It's people meeting specific needs that can actually really further our work here. That's what we're looking for. So we have those kind of conversations to try to get people in one of these categories.
So I love actually that whole filter of you get a request, it's an email, it's a connection and somebody saying, hey, can we bring, and it's never just, well, I shouldn't say that, but there's a filter for that. It's like, what were you thinking? And do you fit into this? And we actually have these plans to receive different types of trips. If it's outside of that, maybe the conversation needs to change. I think that in itself is a really great framework. Andrea, would you say that in a different context where maybe receiving larger groups is a possibility more often, would there be another bucket, or is that pretty much a good overview of the types of buckets?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, hearing from Caitlin what their specific needs are in Japan is that the context will always be different depending on where you are, what type of work you do. With that being said, I really believe that the best short-term trips are ones that are not going with their own agenda. If they're going with an agenda and they're contacting you saying, we want to come and do this, right? If that doesn't fit into what you're already doing, what your ongoing ministry is, then that's a red flag and you should say no. Like there's no reason, there's no benefit that can come from that. I would say, which is a pretty strong statement. But I think really what we encourage our teams to do is to, and with the partners that we're working with, is we ask the partner, what are the things that you're already doing that are part of your ongoing work? And so how could a team support that ongoing work? We never want a partner or a host missionary to create some new program just to fit the needs of a team. Unless it's something that they have a desire to do and they don't have the resources to do it. So if it's something that's always been on their heart or a part of their plan of ministry, but they don't have the resources, either financially or the personnel to do it, then that's a great opportunity for bringing in a team. And sometimes that could be a larger team where there's, a program that they want to be able to run, but they just don't have the staffing to do it. And a short-term team could come in and fill that role. But otherwise, I really believe that teams need to be just fitting in with whatever the ongoing ministry is that's happening in that place. And that's their opportunity to either catch the vision, become part of the accountability that Caitlin suggested, or just having the experience themselves, like for them to experience what God is doing around the world. And that God is present around the world and that they just get to participate in that.
So one of the things that I think we can't really dig further into this, I think where we want to land is these are good and encouraging things. How do we do them well so that they are good and encouraging? But the truth is that there's really hard things that as a goer, as someone who just goes on a short-term trip, you don't understand that in my context, if I was hosting a team for at least 7 days before you arrive, I am shopping in the market, I'm buying up, I'm making homemade tortilla chips, I am trying to create all of this. It is a mad dash so that by the time you arrive, I'm exhausted already just from finding a place for you to sleep and creating the activities and the things that are going to function well for you to be here. And what are some of those things that, let's just say it, because I think that women need to be able to say, I'm not the only one who thinks this is really hard. What are the hard things? And potentially even on the backside, after the team leaves, cultural sensitivity is not something they're going to adapt to in 12 days. And what are, the potentially harmful things that we have to clean up on the backside when they aren't trained well to be a blessing during that time? Caitlin, what would you say are some of those really challenging things about short-term teams?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm amazed that you made homemade tortilla chips. And I remember seeing pictures of you girls back, because we went in 2008 too. I think we all left around the same time, right? And I remember seeing pictures of you guys making your own cheese. And I'm not joking. I've thought about that for the last 13 years. Whenever I feel like complaining, I'm like, at least I can buy cheese. So for me, I mean, I have Costco here, so I'm pretty spoiled, but still I have been very exhausted at times because I know for a lot of years we were trying to reduce the cost. So we would host smaller groups in our home. And at some point I just decided we can't, that's not sustainable anymore. It was so hard because just everything is really expensive here. And so that's one thing we've, tried to do is get a really realistic budget for people. And one thing that's been hard too is when people are having more of a tourist mindset than coming to serve. And that's, I think with having clear communication before the trip, that really hasn't happened in a long time. But we have had some trips like that. And that was just hard being over here, feeling, I think that if it's going to have tourist stuff, that's great. Tourism is really fun, but you should use your own money and you shouldn't call it something else and use fundraised funds for that. That's one thing that's been hard for me. And so things that have been helpful are just to have realistic expectations for myself and not feel like I have to be a superstar host. So if they only come over to my house to have coffee and some little snacks, because I just don't have the bandwidth to cook. I have a very small kitchen. everything in Japan is small. So I can't make a big casserole, or I can't, we just have them fundraise for all of their meals, and they pretty much eat out, which is, Japan's a great place to eat out. So they're pretty much okay with that. But there's just
No, I think that's great. Like recognizing what gives you the energy and the life to pour into the team means making some of those concessions about being the super host, and frees you up to enjoy them and to bless them as well. I think that's really great advice, because we do tend to, as women, take that on of, I have to do everything and host well. And I really appreciate that perspective of giving permission to sub it out.
yeah. I know that wasn't an option for you guys. So it depends on your context, right? Like you had to make food for them.
It's true. And, I would say one of the things that is challenging, are those people that have dietary restrictions, and, trying to accommodate things like that. So even knowing about things like that beforehand would have been really helpful for us, than to go to all the trouble of doing something and then have somebody come and say, I can't eat any of this type of things. So Andrea, what about you? What are some really challenging things in hosting?
Yeah, I think setting the expectations is so critical. I think about when we train our teams that are going to be going out to serve, we may spend 2-3 days training on all of these different areas. And at the end of the day, I'll just share with the teams, listen, if you do nothing else, your goal and this trip is successful if you have encouraged the missionaries, if you have just loved on them, if you don't build anything, if you don't accomplish any of the things that you're hoping to accomplish, but if you leave that missionary family and that, those hosts that you're going to serve, if you leave them feeling full and loved on and appreciated, then it's a win. And I just try to remind people of the perspective of, it's very likely that the missionary that you're going to serve alongside, or the host that you're going to serve alongside, is burnt out, is discouraged, is weary, is going through a number of different things. And it should not have to be their responsibility to put on, this fake, smile in order to entertain you. That's not the role of this trip. And I remember my own experience where there was times where we felt like so discouraged in the work that we were doing. And we felt like we couldn't go on, and we were even like, why are we even here? Why are we doing this? And it seemed like God always, divinely appointed a team to come at that time to just encourage us and to say, like, this is amazing what you're able to do and what God is doing through you and what's happening here. And so those are the things that we should be focusing on when there's, so much emphasis on, well, we want to be able to do this. We want to be able to do this. We want to be able to do this. If there's all these demands that are coming from the group, like, eek.
Yes, that's so true. I even want to invite those of you that are watching, what are some of the challenging things that you have dealt with that you would love advice from these ladies who have experience? We love trips except for this part, and I don't know how to better do this part. Use this time to pick their brains. I even remember being a part of a team that was going to encourage, and being amazed at the logistics that they on their team had set in place. So like this particular person was the airport runner. She went to the airport, planes got in late at night, and she was the one, she goes, that's my role on the team. I'm the designated one to pick you up, get you to your places, and you'll meet the rest of the team who have different roles. And they on their team had divided up. Someone was in charge of the meal prep, and someone was in charge of cultural day, where you kind of talked about, hey, these are the things that you may not realize. So there were those types of divisions on the team that made their team great at hosting. I even remember, Andrea, do you remember the family in Gulu who they had a scavenger hunt that their short-term teams did when they arrived, and it helped them to get to know the city that they were going to be serving in. And they just set them loose for a day to go find this shop, go find this. And then it took away the fear of this unknown city because they'd walked the streets, they had found things. And, ideas like that were always so encouraging about how people were creative in the way that they hosted their teams. I also know that we had this story that I don't even remember if it was real or if it was just this like horror story that was like lore that was passed down to workers at the time. But it was about how a short-term team came in and they pierced all of the ears of the babies because they thought that girl babies didn't get taken for satanic rituals and boy babies did. And so they pierced the ears of every baby because they felt like that would save them from being taken for this ritual. And what the backside of that was, these all got infected and babies got sick, and that wasn't even true. But the team felt like they had done something really well and they left feeling good. But on the backside, you had parents that couldn't afford the medical bills that happened because they didn't know how to take care of things. And so it was just that, short-term team lore of this is what could be the worst thing that could happen. How do we prevent things like that happening? So, Caitlin, if you have a team that comes over, do you spend time going over any cultural things with them? Or is it pretty much, really, we're a big city, you kind of get it kind of thing?
We definitely do the first main day. I mean, everybody's like glazed over after flying so far, but the first day is usually kind of like cultural acquisition day. And it's really like giving them a vision for the rest of their time. And I think it's super important. I think what you mentioned about giving them some freedom to go out and like maybe even get lost. I mean, everybody has a phone now, so they're not that lost, right? Compared to when we moved over here, when we were for reals lost. But it gives them a sense of, whoa, what would it be like if I would just actually moved over here or if I was working here? And I think that's really good. But usually I'm not usually there for that. I'm like at home with my kids. So this is usually, my husband takes them out, but I hope I explain what he does during that day well. But I think it's usually super fun and interesting for people. So they go to super, super busy station. Like if you've ever seen that crazy scramble crossing, imagine what you imagine of Tokyo. It's Times Square on steroids. And then he sends them out for, I don't know, 30 minutes or something to just walk and try to count faces. And so if you then meet up, and it's impossible to count how many faces you actually see, but then you share the statistics of the state of Japan, where it's less than 1% Christian. Tokyo alone is 37 million people. And so all those faces that they had just looked into, and then actually doing an estimate and try to figure out how many of them could possibly have ever been to church or ever met a Christian or ever heard the gospel. It's like, it's pretty rattling. And so then I think it's also really important after that to then share the gospel, because we always need the gospel. Like we're a sieve of the gospel. So every day, preach the gospel to myself and to others, right? So giving them a vision of why we're here. And you can say, Japan is landlocked. You can say it's hard to find a venue for a church. And people are like, well, why don't you just buy a Walmart and put a church there? When they're actually standing there, they understand. They understand the complications of what we're doing. They understand the importance of what we're doing. And then when we are telling them that, it actually becomes a huge encouragement to us. Because, I mean, if you guys are anything like me, sometimes you kind of lose sight of what we're doing, why we're doing it. Sometimes, that's why we have to preach the gospel to ourselves every day. And so being able to see people experience it kind of like you did when you first hit the ground, it's always, I think, a hidden blessing of these short-term trips.
Andrea, when you were saying, helping them to understand, encouraging the global worker is valuable in itself. I think that that's so true. You get in the middle of your work and you forget we're doing a good thing. It feels like you only see all the things you didn't accomplish, all the things that went wrong, all the relationships you felt betrayed by. And then a team comes with fresh eyes. And I love that that's part of your prepping them to go, is to say, call out all the good things that you see, because they may have forgotten the good that they're doing, and just how much that encourages them in that same aspect. Is there anything that you, Andrea, would encourage teams to be specific and clarifying? So as you're on the training and sending outside, what's helpful for them to know up front, to be able to communicate for those that are coming to be successful and helpful?
Yeah, I think just hitting on the cultural issue, it can be near impossible to train a team for going into a specific culture. I mean, we lived in Uganda for 5 years and I felt like we were still just scratching the surface of understanding the culture. So we really take the perspective of, we need to just lay the foundation of what is culture. We need to help our participants who are coming to actually think about the way in which American culture impacts them on a daily basis and the way in which they view the world. And so we kind of lay that foundation, and we help them reframe maybe what their role will be, really portraying the fact that they're going as someone who should be willing to learn, and that there's going to be boundless learning opportunities to serve. And so some of the things that we talk about when we're doing cultural training is not specific to a certain culture, but really, guidelines and principles that are helpful for anybody who's working in any type of cross-cultural situation, or engaging with anybody who's different than them, which can happen, in your own neighborhood. It doesn't have to happen across the world. And so we talk about the idea that, we have to acknowledge and face the stereotypes we might have about the place and the people that we're going to work with. We have to acknowledge the stereotypes they might have about us as Americans, so that we can try to, break down those walls. We have to be willing to say, it's not wrong, it's just different, right? When we're approaching something new and we're feeling the tension of, this is like total culture shock, we have to remind ourselves, just because it's different than what we're used to does not mean that it's wrong. It's not a place for us to impart our judgment. We encourage our teams, one of the best things that you can do is just be asking questions, trying to gather as much information as possible. And the hosts are there to be that resource for you because they've been there longer. So they can give you some of the insight into why people are doing things in this way, or, like in Japan, why you can't just buy a huge warehouse and start a church, understanding the specifics of that culture and why it's, and how it's impacting the way in which you have to do ministry there. And ultimately, we always focus on Philippians chapter 2 and drawing them back to, this is the attitude of Jesus. Jesus was a cross-cultural worker, right? And his attitude was to come as a servant, to lay down his own privilege, his own power, his own knowledge, and to just be willing to learn from other people. And so that's, I think, one of the most important things that we can do as we prepare teams. Sometimes I think the teams want to know, yeah, but tell me specifically, what should I do? What can I do? What's appropriate? Those things are well and good. And I think that they need to be instructed by the host, once they arrive, like Caitlin is saying that they do with their groups when they're coming over. But if we don't lay the foundation of just how important culture is and how it impacts everything that we do, and how even as a host, we're taking a chance on you coming over. We're really risking our ministry and our community and our relationships by allowing you to come. We need to let people know that. They need to know, oh, okay, they're taking a risk on me. I think the American assumption is, of course they're going to want me to be there. Of course I have something to offer. And so we kind of have to put people in their place in terms of really setting the expectations that, it is a privilege for the opportunity to go and serve in these places and to come alongside people who are doing long-term ministry, and help them to see, what their role really looks like.
I think it's so true. You look at the benefit of the team and you have to understand, yes, you hope that you're encouraged and your work is encouraged when they leave, but that also, even if only they are shaped and their relationship with the Lord and their heart for the nations has changed, you never know what that's going to look like down the road when they're in a capacity to themselves support work or to be advocates for the local church when they go back. One thing that some global workers are just exhausted by the work and they don't have time to get the word back. This is what's really happening. And we want you to share in the excitement that's coming, but I absolutely have no energy to fully give the pictures. You have all of these little ambassadors that then are excited and can go back and share in that work. And so I think even the perspective of the worker, our expectations is not that there's going to be this movement and all of a sudden you have 100 people coming and wanting to know more because this team was here, but that, the Lord works in the really, really small things to make a really big impact on his time and not on our time as well. And, I think about those expectations, and I'm not somebody that I don't love to hurt people's feelings. I don't know anybody that loves to hurt people's feelings, but I always wrestled with, I remember this sweet team that came over and they wanted to help me by doing the dishes after our team. That was a huge thing. And yet we were on a well that only pumped so much water every day when the sun was up to solar the battery that did the pump. And then in the evening, when that water was gone, you didn't have showers. You had nothing else until the sun came up the next morning. And they just left the water running in the sink to do the dishes because that's what they would do at home. And I'm like going, I appreciate this blessing, but they just don't, know. And so it was like, even being willing to graciously teach and understand their heart in this. And it's just those little things that you don't know when you don't, enter into another culture like that. But I also want to touch on the aspect of your kids. So your kids have this people coming in and out of their lives all the time. And when you have a team that's come, sometimes they want to attach themselves to them and they get invested in, the cool teenage guy that came and then they're heartbroken. And how do you help your kids to, in a healthy way, adjust to these teams and not be so sad or even frustrated that they're even coming? How do you do that with your family?
I don't know. I don't know how to do it well because my kids get really sad. They make really quick attachments. Well, I have 4, so they're all different. But one of my sons in particular, like he's just everybody's best friend right away. And so then when they leave, it's really hard. And so I don't know how to do that well. But I am so thankful that they get the experience of meeting some really cool Christian people they can look up to, because the Christian community here is so small. So we just try to focus on the positives. And then if it's possible and doable, we try to keep in touch with them. And as my kids get older, their ability to actually keep in touch with people will become easier, I suppose. Yeah, it's weird because right now we haven't been able to have anyone. We even have people who are planning to move over here long term who can't get over here. And so all of the things that are challenging about short-term trips still we're excited, but it will be able to happen at some point. We're just waiting. And so it'll be interesting, to see how it goes in the future with my kids. But I do think, like what you were saying about people getting the vision for it, even their connection to our kids. It's like such a memorable experience for people to come across the world. All of those memories are so clear, right? Because it's such a different context. And so I do think the kids can form a special relationship. And I think those adults that they look up to aren't going to just be like, oh, yeah, what was that kid's name again? They remember them. And so I think it's a really special privilege for the kids. But it is sad when they go. But it's really special when we have people that come back several times, because it's sort of they start to look to them as family, because that's how our family works too, right? The grandparents come once a year if possible. We try to, so
Yes.
these people, like I mentioned, Chris and Carol, have been here so many times. So my kids cherish them like family. So it's a privilege, I think, for them, even though it's hard.
Well, and I would say one thing I remember when we first got to the field was going and visiting a family that was very remote that had a lot of kids. And my context was still American teenagers. And that's that, who are you, whatever, put you off. And when we pulled up, they're teenagers and the whole way were standing on their roof excitedly waving at us. They were so excited. And I was like, this is not the normal response to me arriving anywhere, but let alone from teenagers, and it's just that heart of excitement, and it's somebody new to invest in me and to get to know in a relationship. And
yeah, and they get to be the teacher, which is kind of fun for them. Although it's hard for them because they don't know what's different between Japan and America. Like in my kids' case, like they've grown up here. So when people ask them what's cool about Japan, they're like, I don't know. Like, but it's kind of fun when they get to interact with people who are like, if they've been trained up, like Andrea's talking about, where they're not coming in like, here I am, and here's what I have to offer you. Yeah. They're asking questions to me and to my kids, and the kids think it's fun that they're like, these grownups don't even know how to pronounce that right,
Well, we even have someone in the chat who's saying a relationship that formed out of a short-term trip ended up for the son being a best man in their son's wedding. So a relationship that they just found through a short-term trip ended up being a lifelong connection. And I love that. Andrea, would you add anything about that whole conversation?
Yeah, my kids were really young when we were still living over there, so they weren't super, involved in the process. But I would say, yeah, if you know that the host has kids, of various ages, again, it's equipping the team before they go to say, like, engage with these kids because they may be 10 years younger than you, but you could probably learn a lot from them. Like they're going to be a great source of information too. And that helps develop the relationship and make it meaningful.
Yes. I remember we had, I took my then 16-year-old son on a short-term trip to encourage some workers. And when we asked if he could go, they were super hesitant, and I think when they left, they would have rathered he just came. Like he was the highlight for them, for their family, their kids love him, and it can be a huge blessing on that as well. We had a question up here. Do you think that short-term trips really result in long-term commitments? I would love to hear your thought. I would just say that is why we served overseas. Was my husband got invited on a short-term trip and came home and wrecked my world. Like, it was like, hey, our life's getting ready to change, just so you know. And so, yeah, I would say in our situation, I would say 100%. I think not 100%. For me, it was 100%. But that yes, I have seen that result. What about you all? Have you seen that in your own life, in the lives of those that you have been a part of?
I actually was wondering that myself, and I did research about it a few days ago. And I don't have the source. I could try to find it in a minute. But according to the research I read, since short-term trips have been going up, long-term workers has gone down. And I think maybe it's not completely corollary. It could just be a cultural shift where travel becomes really easy, as opposed to 100 years ago, where if you're going, you're getting on a boat and you're saying goodbye maybe forever. So, but I know for Japan, over the last 20 years, the long-term workers has gone down by 34%. So I think if the mindset is, I'm going to go do my wanderlusting and I'm going to go and check out, guess on, how many countries I've been to on these short-term trips, then the motivation is different, right? Than somebody who's ready to completely move. So part of the ease of travel might be harming long-term trips. But I said earlier, I went on a trip and I was like, I'm not gonna do that with my life. And then my husband, who had never gone on a trip, was the one that was like, well, I mean, we made the decision together. It wasn't only him, but he had not gone. So it's like an opposite of Denise, your story. And he even had somebody tell him, maybe you shouldn't do this because you've never gone on a short-term trip. Maybe you should try it out a little bit before you decide you're just going to move. But we had never even visited Japan before we packed our bags and went. So I think it's you never know what God is going to do and how he's going to call you. So
I am so fascinated by that. I want to have another conversation about that, to never have been and to go. I really am. I'm interested what that statistic would be. I think global workers in general are going down, but I wonder of the number of people that are going, even though it's a smaller number, how many of them had gone on a short-term trip that, so I do agree. I think that, and one of the differences I think is people are going with a mindset of, this is not the rest of my life. I'm going to give a chunk of my life, maybe 2 to 5 years to this. But those who are going to say, I'm going to retire from this, that mindset, I think in the last 10 years has totally changed as well.
Can I jump in on that question? I think there's a couple different things. One is, just because we might not be seeing Westerners going in increasing numbers doesn't mean that short-term, trips aren't impacting long-term workers. I think we are seeing a rise in a lot more, nationals who are rising up and serving in those roles, which, personally, I believe is a wonderful thing in most contexts. So, we can't necessarily compare. It's almost like apples and oranges. Like, we have to see the bigger picture of the shifts that are taking place globally within Christianity, within the world of missions. But something, there's not a ton of research out there on the long-term impacts of short-term missions. There's a lot of debate of how do you quantify what the long-term impact is. Is it just more attendance in church, or giving towards missions, or, going to serve, long-term and dedicating your life to that? And in all of those, studies that have been done, particularly the one by Kurt Verbeek, and there's a number of others, I don't see a lot of questioning as to how we're doing these trips. So a lot of the research is saying, yeah, these trips maybe aren't necessarily seeing long-term results in the way that we're measuring them, but where is the consideration of, maybe it has more to do with how we're doing them than just how many people are being sent. And that's what I'm constantly wrestling with, that idea of, because I do believe that short-term trips can lead to long-term results. I mean, that's my story, my husband's story. So many of the other people that we partner with globally, their experience started because of a short-term trip. And so there's definitely a connection there. But if we want to see continued long-term results, maybe we need to be asking the questions, not just how many trips are we sending, but how are those trips being sent?
Which is something that people could definitely reach out to you and Touch the World. And, if you would like to have any more resources about that, I'm sure Andrea and the organization would be happy to. How do we do this well? And, we had another question come up about, do we have any tips to encourage partnership without creating dependency from a short-term trip? So you guys have any thoughts on that?
I don't know if I'm answering this exactly right, but I'm thinking of an example of an amazing partnership that we have. And it's not through them sending huge trips. They send smaller groups, but it's people that can go back, kind of like, I think Denise, you were talking about this. It's people that can get a vision, and then they're kind of like the ambassador to the church. And so one example we have is this church basically views us as an extension of themselves. It's not like named that or anything, but when we have a baptism, they show the video. They have multiple services at their church, right? So whenever someone is baptized in the first service, they would show like the photo and everybody celebrates it in the following services. But it's the same for when we have somebody come to faith and baptized in Tokyo. The photo is shown at this church and they celebrate these people. And through that, the whole church, this whole supporting church really has been such a support in the way a church should support workers overseas without actually being there. There's no dependency. They've blessed us immensely. And so that's just one example that I've thought of. I know that there are different contexts where it is like the short-term trips that come, and you know that by these people coming, this child is going to get sponsored. You know that these big groups coming, that your basically your whole ministry is kind of hosting these, at least for some of your staff, because you know that it's going to mean funding for your ministry. And that's, that could be a type of dependency that actually fuels the work there. So I just think you have to be creative in your own context and figure out how to best utilize these groups, how to give people a vision for what you're doing, how to like get the support, because really a lot of it is us getting support to be able to do what we're doing, right?
I think just building on that, we found that people love to wrap their hands around something specific. Vague and broad support our work was a challenge, but reaching out to a specific group of people, this Sunday school class Skyped at the time, Zoomed us in, and adopted a project. We needed something for our children's work that was happening, and they took that on, and they felt like they were making a difference in that one thing. And they never sent anyone to visit us, but that relationship where they felt like we own this piece. Or you have a child who is really struggling, and this other group you're reaching out to, and like, would you specifically just lift up my child in this area, the bad dreams they're having or something? And they become invested in that child and in their birthday and in their wins and losses like no other group, because you have specifically said, I'm handing this piece to you. And that doesn't have to have any strings attached to it with a trip, but they become a part of the work in a specific way. And so I don't know, Lauren, if that answers your question, but I do think that we can be creative to encourage partnerships that don't necessarily have to do the expense of a trip and all of that emotional and physical capital that comes with that.
I would just add that I think both parties need to recognize it as a partnership. So both sides need to acknowledge, I have something to offer and I have something to receive. There'll always be dependency if one side is always saying, what's this group going to give me? And I'm not giving anything in return. And that's on both sides. So I think when we're talking about partnership, it's so important that both sides are viewing it as a partnership, and that they're actually having hard conversations together, willing to really partner with each other. And for particularly those who are coming from the American church, are willing to say, what are the things that would not be beneficial for us to do? And for the other side to be willing to be brutally honest and say, this would not be helpful. Yeah. And when the dependency comes is when, you're just phased by dollar signs or potential for things. But if it doesn't fit into your long-term plan of ministry, then that's not partnership. That's one side kind of dictating, this is what we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Ladies, you have been a challenge to me. You have encouraged me. I hope that, and I know that you have encouraged those who have watched this and who will watch this. And I would just, Andrea, are you willing for people to reach out to, Touch the World if they do have questions about how to do short-term teams well? Maybe
yeah, absolutely. I would just say we're at touchtheworld.org. We also have an online training platform, which is the missionsacademy.org. So you can check that out. The last thing I want to mention, because it didn't come up in our conversation, is if you're involved in short-term missions in any degree, you really need to be following along with standards of excellence in short-term missions. They kind of really lay out the guidelines and parameters of years and years of doing short-term missions and, short-term teams and research, and kind of provide some of the standards of what things you need to make sure are included in your program. So that's soe.org.
Okay. And Sarah is working to, I think, get some of that in the, oh, way to go. Thank you, Andrea, for putting that in the chat. Ladies, we do like to keep this to an hour. We know that those who are watching it plan accordingly, but thank you so much. Caitlin, thank you for staying up late for us.
It was so fun. Thank you.
Get some sleep soon.